Hello, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a long time and I've missed this, but I've been back from uni on Christmas holidays, which means I've done a lot of reading and I've got a lot of content to record. Let's get started. Today I've got Twisted Love by Ana Huang. This is 358 pages. It has a 4-star rating on Goodreads, and this took me about 48 hours to finish. I felt some kind of affiliation with this before I started reading it, given that one of the first books I ever wrote myself was titled Twisted Love. Looking back now, that's a very cringeworthy piece of writing that I don't want to revisit. But yeah, straight away I thought, there's a connection there for me. Alex Volkov is a devil blessed with the face of an angel and cursed with a past he can't escape. Driven by a tragedy that has haunted him for most of his life, his ruthless pursuits for success and vengeance leave little room for matters of the heart. But when he's forced to look after his best friend's sister, he starts to feel something in his chest. A crack, a melt, a fire that could end his world as he knew it. Ava Chen is a free spirit trapped by nightmares of a childhood she can't remember. But despite her broken past, she's never stopped seeing the beauty in the world, including the heart beneath the icy exterior of a man she shouldn't want. Her brother's best friend, her neighbour, her saviour and her downfall. Theirs is a love that was never supposed to happen, but when it does, it unleashes the secrets that could destroy them both, and everything they hold dear. So I knew that I'd love this book from the moment I read the synopsis. A good romance plot with lots of twists and turns. This was going to be a bit of me. This book does contain a content warning, which I will share. This story contains explicit sexual content, profanity, mild violence, and topics that may be sensitive to some readers. For a detailed list, please visit, and then a link to a website. The heading of the first chapter simply says One and Ava, so I'm already assuming that this is a novel which may include chapters from different characters' points of view. As I start reading, I very quickly decide that I already like Ava. She just seems like a normal person, and so for the reader, that's easily relatable. I was already laughing before I'd finished the first page. This novel uses a first-person narrator, and so most of the narrative has been Ava's inner monologue at this point. The last line on the first page read, "I might be a glass-half-full kind of gal, but I wasn't an idiot," which made me laugh. That's my sort of take on being a positive realist. So that's the first page, and I already felt like I was kind of starting to get to know Ava. Now, this may have just been me getting overexcited because I'm a romance fan. Okay, this was me getting overexcited, but 6 pages in, I was already thinking, oh, this could be the start of something. Their current relationship isn't really best to develop into something romantic, but their actions and the way they talk to each other, as well as Ava's thoughts, I felt were grounds for a possible romance. Which is props to Ana Huang's writing. On that note, I was somewhat annoyed when I read a description of a character from Ava's point of view. So this was the guy that I thought, oh, something could happen here. However, he'd also since proved himself to be a bit of an arrogant airhead, but the way that Ana writes him, I was thinking, oh my goodness, he's amazing, like from Ava's point of view, which I was really annoyed about because I knew outside of that situation he wasn't a good person. 10 pages in, I felt that there was a prominent coming-of-age theme, which was written perfectly with just the right amount of humour. After the first chapter, I'd laughed and rolled my eyes I don't know how many times. I was already invested, so I couldn't wait to carry on reading. Immediately in this chapter, Alex's attitudes towards love, romance, and sex are made pretty clear. Those 3 things also seem as though they're going to be pretty prominent themes and consistent themes throughout the rest of this novel at this point. 18 pages in, I am obsessed. And yeah, that's absolutely the fanboy in me. But some romance tropes are just die hard. In this instance, someone asking a friend to just watch their sister while they're away, to make sure that they're safe and are okay. This is then the pairing that I briefly mentioned earlier, so I was slightly giddy and didn't plan on putting the book down anytime soon. On page 26, something was hinted at, and I actually said no out loud. It was then confirmed on the next page. Although I have no idea how anything might happen, all of this is fueling the chemistry and tension between the same two characters. Okay, so the end of chapter 4, I was very aware that this was going to be a slow burn romance, something that I love. The exchanging of glances, fingers brushing, and almost kisses were very bittersweet, but you know what? I love it. I'm here for it. At the beginning of chapter 5, I was quite excited again. Something is referred to which isn't an obvious contribution to the plot, but I managed to convince myself how it may be able to fuel the romance that I'm rooting for at this point. So I haven't put the book down since I first picked it up, and obviously I had to carry on reading. Okay, so with regards to the chapters having different points of view, the reader is aware that Ava is somewhat infatuated with Alex, even though she doesn't want to be, and thus far, Alex has only really disclosed his view of Ava is seeing her as his best friend's little sister. However, at the beginning of chapter 5, which is written from Alex's point of view, it's revealed that Alex has realised, oh, Ava's actually quite attractive. And although that doesn't really sit comfortable with him because she's his best mate's sister, I feel as though he's slowly starting to see her for the woman that she is, rather than, his mate's little sister. An hour in now, I still haven't put the book down, and I wasn't planning on putting it down anytime soon. Oh my goodness, oh no, oh no, which is actually what I said out loud when I read this part in the book, about 5 times. So I'm going to try and give as little information as I can, but you need context. Ava's sort of love interest walks in on her in a spicy photo shoot. There is a whole load of context for this, don't worry, but I'm trying not to spoil too much. Anyway, this is possibly the worst thing that could happen given the circumstances at this point. I was cringing so much, but I had to know what happened next. Halfway through chapter 6, I was thinking, this is not going to end well, but also really wanted to find out what was going to happen. At this point, I felt as though the plot was somewhat reminiscent of a chick flick style film, with the plot heavily being oriented around Ava, her love interest, and how her close friends' thoughts and feelings sort of influenced that and affected the situation. But being a romance fan, there was enough romantic tension and romantic context for me to want to continue reading. So I'd kind of figured that Ava's love interest had a deep backstory behind him, and what I thought could possibly be the case wasn't actually far from what had happened in his past. But when a bit more is revealed, I did feel bad about some of the assumptions I'd made about him. Him being what I thought was ignorant and obnoxious wasn't him being rude socially. It becomes clearer that it's actually his effort not to feel and not to let people in for the sake of not growing to care for them. But I'll say no more about that. I think it's brilliant when authors strategically reveal information about characters like this. It catches the reader off guard, it reads well, and it's not as if it's just been thrown in for the sake of plot development and, to add some character depth. The start of chapter 8 is brilliant, and I think this is kind of representative of my chick flick comment earlier. Operation Emotion, phase Sadness, which will make sense when you read the book. I applied makeup, brushed my hair, and wore my favourite white cotton sundress with yellow daisies at the bottom. It was both pretty and comfortable, and it showed off just enough cleavage to intrigue. Liam had loved it. I knew that this was the introduction to what was going to be rising action at the least. The beginning of chapter 8 is so great. It's written with a mix of dialogue and Ava's inner monologue. It had me crying with laughter. Real people mess up and embarrass themselves. How this scene reflected that was just hilariously brilliant. Oh my goodness, they watched a movie together and I was freaking out the entire time. The way Ana Huang writes the dialogue, action, and description had my mind racing, my heart pounding, and I was grinning like a Cheshire cat. Halfway through chapter 8, I was thinking, oh my goodness, just kiss. And the tension just kept rising and rising, and as physically uncomfortable as I was, as in my chest was tight, I kept holding my breath intermittently and I was barely blinking, but I absolutely loved it. Then it all came crashing down. I was convinced, you know what, that they're going to kiss. This is going to happen. It's been building and building, building. They're going to kiss. Then the guy completely ruined the moment in a typical, like, ignorant guy style. But you know what? Again, this is just another case of almost giving the reader what they want, which is essential in a slow burn romance. So just over 2 hours later, I realised I could finish this book in a day, and I really wanted to. Something I love about the coming-of-age theme in this novel is that even though the narrative is focused on the protagonist, the reader doesn't just get their perspective. For example, it's very clear that the brother's best friend, Ava's love interest, sees her as his best friend's sister and nothing more. However, with regards to that and that coming-of-age theme, he ends up spending time with her and actually getting to know her, eventually realising, oh, she's actually quite attractive. And it's as if a blindfold has been taken off. And this specific point in the novel is very obvious, which I just think is brilliant writing. And now that I say that, obviously I mentioned the protagonist, and I'd always thought of Ava as the protagonist. However, like I said, it is dual point of view. I wonder if I'd have thought differently if Alex's point of view had been the first chapter. I don't know, it's food for thought. The character investment, or rather the investment in the plot, or, well, both, that I had reading this was ridiculous. Not even halfway through, there was a very tense scene which had my stomach doing backflips. I did this nervous laugh out loud, and I could not put the book down because of how tense this scene was for the characters involved. It was brilliant. I didn't realise how much emotional investment had been built in this relationship, which wasn't even a relationship yet. We'll call it a potential relationship. Until chapter 13, where I found myself thinking, they have got to kiss tonight. This chapter also made me realise that there was a consistent theme of teenagers and hormones versus authentic connection and romance, which was something that I'm all for. Okay, so not something I really want to share, but I will for the sake of explaining how good of a book this is. Chapter 14 did make me cry. There's something that I've just never really been able to put into words before, but wow. Ava says, that's why Liam cheating on me hurt so much. I wasn't really in love with him, so I wasn't heartbroken per se. But he's yet another person who was supposed to love me, but didn't. She says, why does this keep happening to me? And I carried on reading until I thought, oh my goodness, that's a tear. This scene in chapter 15 was ridiculous. These characters are physically closer to each other than they have been before. And although it's very intimate, it's a neutral setting, so nothing's going to happen unless either one of them chooses to say or do something. They just simply remain at their stalemate. At this point, I realised I'd unconsciously brought the book quite close to my face, which I feel is the reader's equivalent to being on the edge of your seat. So I had to do a posture reset before I continued reading. It wasn't until I was about halfway through this book that I realised there was a significant enemies to lovers trope. It took me a while because I typically think of Romeo and Juliet, but this wasn't that dynamic. It more so followed the forced proximity trope, where two people are forced to spend time with each other, inevitably get to know each other and then realise how much they actually have in common. Something that came as a relief as I neared chapter 20 was how Ana Huang keeps Ava relatable. I've mentioned before that perfect characters are unrealistic, and there's something mentioned at this point that just made me love Ava a little bit more. It was relatable and made her seem more of a real person. Oh my goodness, the first kiss was perfect. It was spontaneous, but because of the tension that had been building over the past however many chapters, it wasn't unexpected. The description was perfect, and so was the context because it wasn't perfect. It might be good for the fantasy genre, or aspects of the fantasy genre, but perfect in a book isn't realistic, which then isn't relatable, which then loses reader investment. But this kiss was bittersweet, because it was perfect up until immediately afterwards when he says something like, oh, we shouldn't have done that, that shouldn't have happened. But then he then follows up with, what were you thinking? Oh my goodness. As if he hadn't had all of the thoughts and feelings that he'd had over the previous chapters. And yeah, he kind of makes out that it's her fault, so that realistic response kind of balances out the perfection of the actual kiss. But there was also so much rising action in this scene. I obviously had to carry on reading. I could not put this book down. It was annoying because of the whole 2 points of view thing. Obviously, the reader knows exactly how both Alex and Ava feel about each other, but their communication with each other is not their strong point. I'm aware that this is drastically romanticised to some degree for the sake of a romance novel, but the fact that they both take similar actions that they feel bad about in order to help address and cope how they feel about each other made my heart ache. I'm aware that this makes little to no sense, but that's because I don't want to give any spoilers. 15 hours later, after first picking this book up, I was halfway through, and I didn't really want it to end, which also made me question, how is it going to end? Obviously, I'd have to carry on reading to find out, which is exactly what I did. Oh my goodness, I was completely freaking out. At chapter 22, Ava and Alex's relationship dynamic has completely changed, and I was so invested. You know just enough about the characters to feel as though you know them, but are also aware that there's a lot to learn, and parts of this are revealed very effectively throughout the narrative. Ana Huang, I have so much respect and admiration for you. Okay, this scene was absolutely perfect. Okay. Writing a sex scene might seem like a pretty simple task, and you know what? It is. Writing a good sex scene that also reads well is not easy to achieve. You have to take into account your audience, who you're writing for. That immediately dictates a lot of the content of any such scene. The way this was written was somewhat new to me. I'm a romantic, and I'd happily read a page of descriptive metaphors and euphemisms with the odd appropriate adjective thrown in, and I'd say it was written really well. There is, however, a very fine line in fiction and writing fiction and romance between romance and smut. Most writers are on one side or the other, but this scene, I felt, definitely towed that line. And it was brilliant because it didn't read as if it was just because that's how Ana Huang had decided it would be best to write it. It was perfect because it reflected Ava and Alex's relationship perfectly and everything that happened between them up until this moment. What? Oh my goodness, no. Plot twist. So, Ava has experienced some trauma in her childhood, and that story has been clarified. But at the end of chapter 28, a key element of that story is revealed not to be true. And I didn't really know what to do with this information. Oh my life, chapter 29, I feel like everything's coming to a head. The relevant person is going to be held responsible and accountable for something they've done, but this situation also needs to be approached very carefully. So I was slightly tense. Wow, chapter 29 was wild from start to finish, and I actually felt sick at the end. Reveal after reveal after reveal, a lot of questions were answered and loose endings tied in what was a very intense scene. I had a few jaw-drop moments and I had to keep reading. After the huge plot point is addressed, the narrative pretty much immediately addresses the next one, which I'd almost managed to forget about given what had just happened. Ava is in somewhat of a relationship with her brother's best friend, who was meant to be watching her whilst her brother was away. The brother comes back and asks what's going on, using some rather colourful language, and thank goodness Ava tells him exactly what's what and how things are. Ava's brother eventually accepts her new relationship, and that conversation is just great. He responds exactly how I'd imagine someone would if they found out that their best mate, who has a certain reputation, is in a relationship with their little sister. The conversation basically ends with Ava's brother saying he'd kill Alex if he broke her heart. Oh my goodness, the end of chapter 30. At this point, they've had a huge grey area of what's actually going on between them, and they haven't put a label on things. But Ava says, "I love you." And I freaked out before realising that I had to find out how Alex responds. Okay, oh my goodness. So he gives this romantic speech, which is so heartfelt, but then Ava thinks, out of everything that he says, he never says, "I love you too." So that thing I mentioned about relatable characters, it's important not to make your characters perfect. So when Alex messed up, I was gutted and quite annoyed, but then also realised it was kind of called for, as he was becoming a little too perfect. Ava says she doesn't want him to lie to her, and Alex says that he won't lie, unless the truth hurts her. Yeah, I was very annoyed at that part. I just thought, for goodness sake, but as I mentioned, not writing him as this perfect person makes the character realistic. Okay, so this subplot has been slowly introduced throughout the entire book, but at chapter 35, what I'd started reading as a romance novel had gracefully shifted into an almost crime thriller genre, usually not my thing at all, but because it was so unexpected, I loved it. Halfway through this chapter, my jaw dropped. This rising action had been hinted at for quite a while, but I didn't think Alex would actually go through with it. I was wrong. Emotionally charged, he went in 110%. By the end of chapter 36, I felt somewhat cheated, as I felt the entire romance plot thus far had basically just built emotional investment in the characters and their relationships, so that the pinnacle of this other plot was so much more significant. And then I was really annoyed. I was annoyed for Ava. So much had happened that she didn't deserve, and she deserved so much better than what she did get. I now had less than 100 pages left, and all I could think was, it can't end like this, which was brilliant writing. The rising action of the plot had essentially ended, and so it was entirely plausible that the plot could end. But I still had hope. And that's not easy to achieve as an author. I've read books before where essentially the plot has ended, and then there's been, like, I've known that, but then we've got 100 more pages of unnecessary information. But I was hoping with everything that I had that things would change in these last few pages, even though pretty much all of the loose endings had been tied up. The sense of suspense with 3 chapters left to go was ridiculous. I'm always amazed when an author can make a text read as fast-paced. It was the equivalent of when, in a film, action music starts playing. I was reading very quickly, I was panicking ever so slightly, and I almost didn't want to know how it would end. But obviously, I also absolutely did want to know. This book shows how even people like Ava, who wear their heart on their sleeve and choose to see the best in people, can turn ice cold when they're finally done with being messed around and used by someone, and rightfully so. I completely got why Ava had reacted the way that she did, and I fully supported her, but I am a romantic, and when Alex gave his heartfelt speech, I almost cried. I was still just hoping that everything would work out. Then, at the same time that I actually shed a tear, the text said, "My heart split in half." The last chapter, I was in bits. There was just enough to justify still having hope, but Ava also had every reason to say, you know what, like, I'm done, I'm hurt, I'm over this, I'm not going to waste my time anymore. With 30 pages left, I was in tears, but I barely moved. If you're a bookworm, you'll know what I'm referring to when I talk about the times that you don't realise you're crying until you actually can't see the page. I can't say what made me cry. No, I can't say what made me cry because no spoilers, but I thought it was very romantic. In this chapter, it's so clear that Ava has changed Alex and how he's changed. At the point where I had 20 pages left and I'd shed more tears, it was very clear to me that Alex isn't a bad guy. He's a good guy who's made mistakes and done bad things. That's by no means an excuse for some of the things he's done, but oh my god, this just needed to end well. It had to. I don't want to reveal anything about the ending because I haven't read a book in quite a while that's managed to literally make me laugh and cry so much in such a short space of time. But as a reader, I find that so cathartic. And again, I have so much respect for any writer who can evoke that strong of an emotion with the written word. This is definitely a girls' coming-of-age kind of book. I loved it nonetheless, so I would definitely recommend as a girls' young adult romance. I'm also a total fanboy for this, so if you are a romance fan, please give it a read regardless. Please like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you know when I upload my next review.